This is from Wichita Falls, Texas, and it's simply, hey, what happens to Texas A&M as a football program this year if Bobby and Jimbo can't get the job done? Bobby Petrino, of course, the new offensive coordinator, Jimbo Fisher, head coach there. What happens if they can't get the job done? Well, there will be changes. Point blank. I don't see any way around that. Now, I am assuming something here. I'm assuming that when you say they can't get the job done, that is reminiscent of what they did last year or failed to do last year, right? I'm gonna assume that because it wasn't exactly spelled out. And to be very clear with you, what they failed to do last year is make a bowl game, and that's inexcusable. At a place like Texas A&M, it's inexcusable. I don't really even think they would argue that. So let's just say, for argument's sake, let's get really sadistic for a second. This is not a prediction. It's just a hypothetical. We can traffic in those. That's what God invented April for. So let's say the sadistic side of us hits the simulation button, and that's exactly what happens. We got Texas A&M sitting at home in December, having failed to make a bowl game. To be very clear, if that were to happen, massive changes would come about in College Station. I don't see any way around that. You can toss buyouts at me all you want to. I have thought that through. I have talked to enough people with sort of guided knowledge at the forefront of Texas A&M athletics that I believe, regardless of how big that number is, there would be movement, because you can't afford not to. Like you can look at one side of that coin and say, oh, imagine financially how big a hit you take. Well, let me toss an alternative at you. You are now, in this scenario, 2 years, a massive underachiever. You're about to add Texas and Oklahoma to this league, and I'm not quite sure where they're slot in that pecking order. But if you're back-to-back missing out on bowl games, it'll be ahead of you, as will Kentucky. Just take a random program. South Carolina, they're ahead of Texas A&M in that scenario. You're talking about A&M being well into the bottom half of the league. And then I want you to think about being an investor, whether it be a season ticket holder or even a mid-level donor out there, much less a high-level donor. And imagine what they ask of you. And the reason I credit these fan bases, and I don't get all that upset when they have sky-high expectations, is because at places like A&M, every time they ask something of you, you give it. So, yeah, it can be a little myopic at times, and you can maybe over-expect sometimes. But, man, when they ask what they ask of you and you deliver, and that fan base delivers, I'm not ever gonna wag my finger at A&M fans and say, what am I about to do? Say, shame on you guys for expecting 8 wins. You ought to expect more than that. And they ought to deliver more than that. So in this hypothetical, dangerous though it may be, if that's what we're looking at, in fact, I would ask our Texas A&M brethren down in Bryan, Texas, or San Antonio, or Victoria, home of Stone Cold Steve Austin, if that were to happen, I want the most ardent of program guys and program girls, Jimbo Fisher supporters, I want you to tell me with a straight face that you'd be ready to DM me in December and say, let's give it another year, because it would be one thing. And this is what I have to remind myself sometimes. It's one thing if Jimbo Fisher is a young head coach or Jimbo Fisher is new to the program. Neither of those things is the case. We're entering, like, what is it, Jesse, 6 or 7 years now? He's been there a while. Been there plenty long enough for every aspect of that program to reflect his thumbprint. I always think in terms of thumbprint. There is nothing about Texas A&M football at this point that should not reflect Jimbo Fisher. So then here's the follow-up. And here's where it gets really, really interesting, and here's where the weeds start to grow around you pretty quick. If you didn't know any better, which doesn't mean you're ignorant, it just means you've got a life and you can't follow A&M athletics day to day. If you didn't know any better, you'd probably find yourself saying, why is this so hard? Jimbo hires a seasoned, experienced, been around the block play caller and his new offensive coordinator, and he hands over the reins to him. Why doesn't Jimbo Fisher just go act as a CEO? And I'll tell you why. Jimbo Fisher is not good as a CEO type. And that is not necessarily my opinion, because I've never worked for the guy. It is the opinion of plenty of people who have, and it is the opinion of plenty of people closer to that program than I am. Some guys are cut out to be that. Some guys are cut out to go to the donor dinners and to be the front-facing image that you think of when you think of that athletic department, that football program. Some guys are really good at delegating. Jimbo needs this. He needs 47 play sheets in front of him. He needs to be involved heavily in the offense, because if he's not, this is not a 29-year-old head coach. This guy, he has planted his roots. He has solidified his image and his identity as being an offensive coordinator, play caller, now a head coach. But it's almost like you're kind of cutting the umbilical cord in his mind from what he attaches to as an identity. So you can make it sound as easy as you want to. I can promise you, even if things were to go swimmingly this year, put yourself in his shoes for a second, imagining yourself as I just described Jimbo Fisher. Scenario A, things go great this year, and the outside world says, well, it only went great once you gave up play calling duties. And then scenario B, it doesn't go well, and we get to about week 3 or week 4. You are then the dad teaching the 15-year-old how to drive, and there's a sharp curve coming up. You're grabbing the wheel. He's going to grab the wheel. It's not as easy as it sounds, trust me, to just go be a CEO. For some guys, maybe. For Jimbo Fisher, not. So it's a very long-winded way of saying they can't afford another year. I don't think that's a bold statement at all. They can't afford another year like they just had.